On Flight 2187 from Atlanta to San Francisco, young Ava stepped onto the plane with a heart full of hope and excitement for the long-awaited family visit. Ava, a gentle and bright 12-year-old with an insatiable love for books, had been looking forward to this journey for months. Her father, FBI Special Agent Marcus Taylor, a man whose steady resolve and kind eyes spoke of 2 decades spent protecting others, accompanied her with an unspoken promise of safety and warmth. They were headed to see Ava's dear grandmother, whose famous peach cobbler had become a cherished part of their family tradition across several counties in Northern California. The promise of that sweet, home-cooked treat, along with memories of happier times after the loss of Ava's mother, filled the air with anticipation. As they navigated the bustling terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport on a sweltering August day, Marcus moved with the calm precision of someone well accustomed to high-pressure situations. He wore an impeccably pressed dark suit that defied the sticky Georgia humidity, and his watchful eyes took in every detail, as if he were on duty, even though this was meant to be a personal trip. Ava admired her father's calm authority and had inherited his ability to notice every little nuance in a crowd. Their conversation was light and warm as they discussed the plans for the 2-week stay in San Francisco, where they would explore scenic hiking trails in Muir Woods, visit interactive exhibits at the Exploratorium, and breathe in the cool coastal air that was so different from the muggy heat back home. However, not everyone on the flight shared the same spirit of familial joy. Behind them in the boarding line was Diane Winters, a woman of 58 who considered herself a member of Atlanta's high society solely because of her late husband's real estate fortune and her own influential presence on various charity boards. Diane's appearance was as immaculate as her haughty demeanor, accentuated by her meticulously manicured acrylic nails that tapped impatiently on her smartphone. With each impatient tap, she grumbled about the heat, the crowds, and the indignity of waiting like everyone else. Her tone carried a subtle arrogance that hinted at deeper prejudices. As she complained loudly about the inconvenience of the ordinary, it was clear that Diane believed herself to be above the rest, expecting special treatment simply because of her wealth and status. When the boarding group was finally called, Marcus led Ava forward with gentle determination, exchanging friendly nods with the gate agent and quietly reassuring his daughter that everything was going to be just fine. Once aboard, they found their seats quickly in the main cabin. Marcus had purposefully chosen a middle seat for himself to act as a protective buffer between the aisle and the window seat reserved for Ava, who was prone to occasional bouts of motion sickness. This thoughtful arrangement spoke volumes about his nurturing nature and the lengths he would go to ensure Ava's comfort on even the longest flights. For a while, the cabin seemed to settle into the calm routine of pre-flight chatter and the soft hum of passengers finding their places. But the peace was shattered when a commotion arose near the front of the cabin. Diane, her face flushed with indignation and stubborn pride, had begun an aggressive confrontation with a flight attendant named Rebecca. "There must be some mistake," Diane declared in a raised voice that cut through the ambient chatter. "I specifically booked a window seat in first class, and I expect to have it." Rebecca, maintaining a professional smile despite the rising tension, explained that Diane's boarding pass assigned her to seat 4C, an aisle seat, because first class was fully booked. Diane's face darkened with outrage as she insisted that she had made special arrangements with her travel agent, and she refused to accept anything less than the comfort she believed she deserved. Marcus, ever alert even in this relaxed setting, watched the exchange with a growing sense of protectiveness. He recognized in Diane's tone not only entitlement, but an unmistakable undercurrent of prejudice. With measured calm, he continued to help Ava settle in, knowing that a simple misunderstanding was quickly morphing into something much more insidious. As boarding continued, Diane wandered through first class in search of someone to swap seats with, her eyes darting around with barely concealed disdain. When she eventually returned to her assigned seat, she shot sharp, angry looks at Rebecca, as if to blame her for every perceived slight. For a brief moment it appeared that the turbulence of the situation might subside as the safety demonstration began and Ava immersed herself in the pages of her latest novel. Then, just as the plane taxied onto the runway and takeoff loomed large, Diane reappeared. Defiant of the flight attendant's instructions to remain seated with her seatbelt fastened, she strode purposefully into the main cabin. Her eyes, cold and calculating, searched the rows until they landed on Ava sitting by the window. Approaching Marcus and Ava with an air of determined arrogance, Diane interrupted their quiet moment by saying in a tone that dripped with condescension, "Excuse me, I need to switch seats with your daughter." Her words were delivered with such deliberate cruelty that it sent a chill through the cabin. Marcus looked up, his eyes calm yet resolute. "I'm sorry, but we selected these seats for a very good reason," he replied firmly. Diane's face contorted into a sneer as she retorted that her own medical condition, which she claimed required her to have a window seat, was far more important than a child's comfort. She insisted that Ava did not need the window seat and that she was entitled to the spot because of her discomfort caused by claustrophobia and anxiety. The cold logic in her words, laced with a prejudiced glint as she took in Ava's dark complexion and made assumptions based on appearance, set Marcus's protective instincts ablaze. He calmly explained that Ava had a history of motion sickness on turbulent flights, a minor inconvenience compared to the emotional damage inflicted by such blatant disrespect, and that they had reserved the window seat precisely to keep her comfortable. The exchange escalated quickly. Diane's voice rose to an almost unearthly level as she declared that a single flight in a different seat would not harm her, while insinuating that the very notion of prioritizing a child's comfort was absurd. Rebecca, the flight attendant, intervened once more, pleading with Diane to return to her assigned seat as the plane prepared for takeoff, but Diane's pride and prejudice would not allow her to back down. Instead, she turned her vitriolic attention fully toward Ava, addressing the young girl in a tone that was both demeaning and harsh. "Young lady, wouldn't you like to be helpful?" she sneered, adding, "I'm sure your father would be proud if you showed some consideration for others." Ava, though confused and hurt by the harsh words, managed to speak softly yet with a quiet determination. "I'm sorry you're uncomfortable, ma'am, but I really do get sick without a window seat." Diane scoffed, dismissing Ava's explanation as mere whimsy, and accused them of selfishness, while demanding that her own comfort be given absolute priority. At that moment, every eye in the cabin was drawn to the confrontation. Passengers exchanged looks of sympathy and indignation, their hearts aching for the young girl who was being targeted by such unprovoked cruelty. Marcus, who had maintained a calm and measured tone throughout, finally could no longer tolerate the personal attack on Ava. His voice, carrying the authority of years spent upholding the law and protecting the vulnerable, rang out clearly as he said, "That is enough. You will not speak to my daughter in that manner. Please return to your seat, now." Diane's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and bitter resentment as she spat back, "I don't know who you think you are, but I am not going anywhere until I get what I deserve." Her words, soaked in arrogance and prejudice, cut through the cabin like a knife, and it was clear that her determination to have her way was rooted in a deep-seated cruelty that had no place in any civilized society. In that tense moment, as the roar of the engines filled the air and the plane's imminent takeoff lent an almost surreal gravity to the scene, the contrast between the warm, protective bond of father and daughter and the icy cruelty of Diane Winters became painfully obvious. Marcus's unwavering defense of Ava, coupled with the girl's quiet strength in the face of such hostility, stirred something deep within the hearts of the other passengers. For many, especially those who had seen life's hardships and longed for moments of true decency, it was impossible not to feel empathy and sorrow for Ava. Her vulnerability in that cramped cabin high above the earth resonated like a soft plea for justice against the backdrop of unyielding prejudice. As the plane prepared to take off and the tension began to ease into a heavy silence, It was clear that this was more than a mere dispute over seating arrangements. It was a collision of values, a battle between the simple, honest desire for comfort and the corrosive impact of entitlement and discrimination. In that brief, unforgettable moment, the true measure of a person was laid bare. It was not wealth or social standing that mattered, but the ability to treat others with kindness, compassion, and respect. For Ava and her father, what should have been a simple flight to visit a loved one had transformed into an emotional crucible, one that would leave its mark on everyone who witnessed it. When the engines finally roared to life and the plane lifted off the tarmac, the memory of that confrontation lingered in the minds of all aboard. It was a reminder that even in the midst of modern travel and convenience, the timeless struggle between cruelty and compassion continued to play out, challenging each of us to stand up for what is right. And as Ava clutched her book and gazed out the window at the vast sky ahead, there was an unspoken promise that no amount of arrogance or prejudice could ever extinguish the light of love and dignity. As the plane continued its slow taxi toward takeoff, the simmering tension in the cabin reached a boiling point. "I get a proper seat and I don't appreciate your tone," the flight attendant, Rebecca, said with mounting urgency, her voice firm yet measured, as she reminded Diane that by disregarding crew instructions, she was delaying the flight and risking a violation of federal aviation regulations. Diane's eyes flashed with anger as she retorted in a near shout, "I will not. This is ridiculous. I paid good money for this flight, and I demand proper accommodations." Her tone was venomous as she fixed her gaze on Ava, the gentle 12-year-old daughter of FBI Special Agent Michael Turner, and her next words fell into the cabin like cold, hard stones. "I'm sure there are plenty of other seats where she would be more comfortable, perhaps in the back of the plane." The implication was unmistakable and cruel, leaving several nearby passengers gasping audibly. Ava's eyes widened in shock and hurt. Her treasured book lay forgotten in her lap as she absorbed the weight of the unkind insinuation. Michael's heart clenched at the sight. He had long shielded Ava from the occasional sting of prejudice, carefully choosing his battles, but this blatant cruelty directed at his daughter ignited a protective fury that he could no longer hold back. With deliberate calm that belied the storm inside him, Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out his credentials wallet. Opening it slowly, he revealed his FBI badge and identification card with quiet authority. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and resolute, "I am FBI Special Agent Michael Turner. What you just said to my daughter could be construed as harassment and a civil rights violation. I suggest you return to your assigned seat immediately, or I will personally ensure that you face federal charges for interfering with the flight crew. A federal offense that can carry penalties of up to 20 years imprisonment." For a long, heart-stopping moment, Diane froze. Her face paled as if the color had been drained from it, and her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled abruptly from water. Seizing the moment, Rebecca repeated, "Ma'am, please return to your seat now." Without another word, Diane turned sharply and retreated toward first class, her defeat made all the more bitter by the realization that her attempt to bully a defenseless child had been thwarted by Michael's unwavering authority. Once Diane had disappeared from view, Michael turned his concern toward Ava. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly, his eyes reflecting both worry and resolve. Ava nodded, though the mix of hurt and confusion still shimmered in her gaze. "Why did she say that about the back of the plane, Dad?" she murmured, her small voice trembling slightly as she tried to make sense of the injustice. Michael sighed, gently squeezing her hand. "Some people carry hate inside them, Ava. It isn't about you at all. It's about their own failings. I showed my badge, partly because of what she said, and partly because interfering with our crew is a serious matter." His words, laced with regret for the cruelty of the world, seemed to comfort her as she managed a timid smile and whispered, "I'm glad you're my dad." As the plane began its ascent through a sky streaked with golden light, an unspoken change rippled through the cabin. Word of the confrontation spread quietly at first, passed in hushed whispers from one row to the next, until nearly every passenger was discussing the incident. There was a shared, simmering outrage on behalf of the young girl in seat 14A, whose dignity had been so callously undermined. Yet, the unfolding drama was far from over. 2 rows behind Michael and Ava, Dr. Emily Chen, a 36-year-old pediatric cardiac surgeon with a keen mind and a compassionate heart, adjusted her glasses and attempted to refocus on the medical journal article she had brought aboard. Having just returned from a surgical conference in Atlanta, Emily's thoughts were still buzzing with the latest breakthroughs in pediatric cardiothoracic surgery. But the distressing exchange between an entitled first-class passenger and the devoted father-daughter duo made concentration nearly impossible. As a Chinese-American woman who had faced her share of discrimination in a male-dominated field, Emily felt a surge of vindication upon witnessing Michael's firm stand against cruelty. The look of shock and humiliation on Diane's face had struck a chord with her, stirring memories of her own childhood experiences with microaggressions and overt racism in suburban Ohio. Unable to remain a silent bystander, Emily closed her journal and unbuckled her seatbelt as soon as the captain turned off the seatbelt sign. With purposeful steps, she walked over to row 14 and cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Michael and Ava with sincere warmth. "I'm Dr. Emily Chen. I couldn't help overhearing what happened earlier." Her gentle words were directed especially toward Ava, who looked up with wide, vulnerable eyes. "I just wanted to say that woman's behavior was completely unacceptable, and you handled yourself with impressive dignity," Emily continued. Ava managed a shy smile and a quiet, "Thank you." Michael, still alert yet grateful for the kind interjection, asked, "Are you a medical doctor?" Emily nodded with quiet pride, explaining that she was a pediatric cardiac surgeon at UCSF Medical Center. Ava's eyes lit up with genuine interest as she mentioned how she and her dad planned to visit the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. "They have a whole exhibit on the human heart," she said, and Emily's face brightened as she added that it was one of her favorite exhibits, marveling at how they made cardiac anatomy accessible and engaging for young minds. Michael then extended his hand in friendly invitation, introducing himself and Ava properly, though Emily politely declined, explaining that she was on call, starting the next morning. As she returned to her seat with a small, satisfied smile, it was clear that the brief moment of solidarity had left a lasting impression on her. Meanwhile, back in first class, Diane Winters sat rigidly in her aisle seat, her face still flushed with humiliation and seething indignation. In her mind, she replayed the moment Michael had flashed his FBI badge, the unwavering authority in his voice, the stark threat of federal charges, and felt a bitter mix of anger and shame. The other first-class passengers avoided her gaze, their eyes lowered in quiet disapproval. Having overheard snippets of her outburst from the flight attendants, it wasn't long before Rebecca returned to Diane with a beverage. "Can I get you a drink, ma'am?" Rebecca asked politely. Diane nodded stiffly, ordering a double vodka tonic. As Rebecca moved away to prepare the drink, Diane noticed the man sitting next to her watching her intently. He was in his early 60s, with distinguished salt and pepper hair and refined, understated attire that spoke of old money and quiet authority. "Rough start to the flight," he remarked in a subtle Boston accent. Diane straightened defensively, insisting, "It's just a misunderstanding, that's all." The man introduced himself as Richard Harrington, his tone casual but his eyes piercing with quiet judgment. Before Diane could fully recover her composure, Richard continued, "Is this really the first time you've had an FBI agent call you out for harassment?" His words, gentle yet unyielding, cut deeper than she expected. Flushed with indignation, Diane snapped back. "I don't know what you heard, but I merely requested a window seat for medical reasons." Richard raised an eyebrow, his tone cool and measured. "Really? Because from what the flight attendant mentioned, you made some rather unsavory comments to a young girl." His observation was delivered not with malice, but with an expectation of decency that Diane clearly lacked. Her grip tightened on the armrest as Richard mused further. People say you can't speak without offending someone these days, but really, isn't it just that you're upset you can't be openly bigoted without consequences anymore? The remark, both subtle and scathing, left Diane momentarily speechless as she turned to face him fully, her face a mask of indignation. "How dare you? You don't know me at all," she spat. Richard simply conceded. "Perhaps not, but I know what it looks like when someone values their comfort more than another person's dignity. I used to see it all the time in my courtroom." He paused, a thin smile playing on his lips as he added, "Your courtroom, perhaps." At that moment, Diane realized with a sinking feeling that she was now sitting between an FBI agent and a retired federal judge. Richard had mentioned he had spent 27 years on the bench in Massachusetts. The realization felt like a cosmic joke at her expense, intensifying her humiliation. Rebecca returned with Diane's drink, setting it carefully on her tray table while informing her that the captain wished to speak with her once the plane reached cruising altitude. Diane took a long, regret-filled swallow of her drink, the vodka tonic burning down her throat as she wondered how a simple flight had turned into such a public nightmare. Meanwhile, back in the main cabin, Michael noticed that Ava had started rereading the same page of her book repeatedly, her mind clearly elsewhere. Softly, he asked if she'd like to watch a movie instead, suggesting that it might help her focus. Ava looked up with gratitude and asked, "Can we watch Hidden Figures again?" Michael smiled gently, knowing well that her favorite films celebrated brilliant women overcoming prejudice and adversity, a reminder of hope in a sometimes cruel world. As they settled in with their shared earbuds and a tablet, neither noticed the man sitting across the aisle, watching them with quiet interest. That man was James Wilson, a 48-year-old journalism professor from Berkeley who had been returning home after a conference in Atlanta. He had witnessed the entire confrontation, and throughout the ordeal he had been struck by the dignified composure Michael and Ava maintained in the face of blatant racism and cruelty. James had spent much of his career documenting stories of injustice and resilience, first as a field reporter and later as an educator nurturing the next generation of journalists. There was something profoundly moving about the way a father's fierce love for his daughter could stand up against such hatred, even in the cramped confines of an airplane. As James observed the lingering whispers and exchanged glances among passengers, he felt a deep sense of admiration and resolve. This incident, he thought, was a stark reminder of the ongoing struggle for decency in our society. In that small, turbulent space high above the ground, the collision between unyielding cruelty and unwavering love had set off ripples that would resonate far beyond the flight. Michael Turner's firm stance in defending his daughter not only protected Ava from an unprovoked assault on her dignity, but also inspired quiet admiration among the other passengers. For many who had seen too much of life's harshness, the sight of such courage and empathy stirred a longing for a kinder, more just world. And though the specter of hatred still hovered in the wake of Diane Winters' vitriolic outburst, the collective spirit of those who believed in fairness and decency shone all the brighter against the dark backdrop of prejudice. As the flight continued its journey high above the clouds, no one could ignore the heavy impact of the earlier confrontation. It was as if the entire cabin had become a stage where the ugliness of prejudice was laid bare for all to witness. Michael Turner, the dedicated FBI special agent, made a silent vow to speak with Diane Winters before landing, for he sensed that this incident was only one thread in a larger tapestry of injustice. There was a story here not just about one moment of cruelty, but about the everyday courage of parents like him, raising their children in a world that too often refuses to see their true humanity. Ava, his sweet 12-year-old daughter, sat quietly, her eyes reflecting both confusion and sorrow as she tried to process the hurtful words that had been hurled her way. Michael knew that even though Ava showed remarkable resilience, every act of cruelty left a scar that no amount of bravery could quickly heal. Soon, the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift as passengers settled back into their routines. Some drifted into sleep while others busied themselves with books or the in-flight entertainment. Beneath this ordinary surface, however, a quiet solidarity had formed among them, a shared understanding born from witnessing injustice and the resolve to stand against it. In first class, the situation was taking an unexpected turn. Captain Rivera had discreetly called Diane Winters to the front galley for a private conversation. In a low, firm tone, the captain told her, "Ms. Winters, I want to be very clear. What happened during boarding was reported to me, and I take it extremely seriously. Discriminatory language or behavior on my aircraft is absolutely unacceptable." Diane tried to defend herself, insisting it was nothing more than a misunderstanding, but the captain was unmoved. He continued, "The safety and dignity of every passenger on this flight is my responsibility. Any further incidents will result in you being restrained in your seat for the remainder of the flight and met by law enforcement upon landing." These words, spoken with unyielding authority, compounded her earlier humiliation, leaving her visibly shaken as she returned to her seat with a heavy heart and a look of deep regret. It was clear that Diane Winters was not only facing public disgrace, but also the prospect of serious consequences for her callous behavior. In the midst of all this, Richard Harrington, a retired federal judge known for his calm, measured demeanor, observed the unfolding drama with a clinical interest. He remarked quietly about the rough conversation, his tone conveying both disapproval and pity for a woman who had allowed her own prejudices to dictate her actions. In his mind, he made a mental note to write about the incident later, knowing that this was not an isolated episode, but part of a larger pattern of intolerance that needed to be challenged. Diane, left alone with her thoughts, closed her eyes in a futile attempt to find sleep. Yet the image of Michael flashing his FBI credentials and the shock that had rocked her carefully constructed worldview kept her awake. She had always assumed that her status and entitlement could intimidate anyone, that her comfort was paramount. Now, however, she was forced to confront the painful reality that her assumptions were not only wrong, but deeply hurtful to those around her. As the plane continued its journey, a sudden bout of turbulence jolted the aircraft, causing drinks to slosh and passengers to grip their armrests tightly. Ava looked up from the movie she and her father had been watching, startled by the abrupt movement. Michael quickly knelt beside her and reassured her, "Just a little rough air, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." Although Ava nodded, her troubled expression betrayed the lingering sting of the earlier exchange. She hesitantly asked, "Dad, that lady, she didn't really care if I got sick without a window seat, did she?" Michael paused, his heart aching at the thought that such cruelty had been directed at his precious daughter. He replied softly, "No, honey, I don't think it was about you at all. It was about how she sees me and what she thinks I represent. Some people let their own insecurities and hate define them, and it has nothing to do with you. It only says everything about them." Ava was quiet for a long moment as she absorbed his words before asking, with innocent curiosity, "Is that why you became an FBI agent? To stop people like her?" Michael managed a sad smile as he explained, "The FBI deals with many kinds of crimes, not just discrimination. But yes, part of why I do this job is to help make the world a little more just. Your grandmother, Alina, fought for what was right in her time, and that spirit runs in our family." Ava listened intently, her eyes shining with both admiration and sorrow at the weight of the world that now lay before her. Just then, an announcement over the intercom from Captain Rivera interrupted the tender moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rivera speaking. We are experiencing some mechanical issues that require us to make an unscheduled landing. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions. We will be landing in Denver within the next 20 minutes. A murmur of concern rippled through the cabin as passengers exchanged worried glances. Michael's professional instincts immediately kicked in as he surveyed the situation. The plane was not descending rapidly, and there were no alarming signs, such as oxygen masks dropping or smoke filling the cabin. It appeared to be a precautionary landing rather than an emergency. Sensing Ava's rising anxiety, Michael gently squeezed her hand and explained, "No, sweetheart, we are not going to crash. Think of it like when I take my car to the mechanic if the check engine light comes on. The pilots are extremely careful and they prefer to be safe rather than sorry." Ava nodded, visibly reassured by her father's calm explanation, even though a trace of fear still lingered in her eyes. In the midst of this, the diverse tapestry of passengers became even more evident. Dr. Emily Chen remained composed, her training and experience in handling emergencies lending her a quiet strength. James Wilson, a journalism professor from Berkeley, continued to jot down notes in his notebook, his mind already piecing together a story that captured not only the cruelty of Diane Winters, but also the bravery of parents like Michael and the resilient spirit of children like Ava. He recognized that this incident was not just a fleeting moment of bigotry, but a stark reminder of the ongoing battle against prejudice, a battle that touched everyone on board. Meanwhile, back in first class, Diane Winters gripped her armrests so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The arrogance that had once defined her was now replaced by a raw, naked fear. Even Richard Harrington remarked dryly that statistically they were still safer on the plane than they had been driving to the airport this morning, a comment that brought a brief, uneasy silence to that part of the cabin. As the plane began its smooth descent toward Denver International Airport, Rebecca and the other flight attendants moved methodically through the cabin, checking that all seatbelts were securely fastened and every tray table stowed away. Rebecca returned to Michael's row once more and asked with gentle concern, "How are you two doing?" Michael wrapped his protective arm around Ava and replied, "We're fine, thank you." Lowering her voice, Rebecca added, "If you need anything at all, please let me know. I want you to know that what happened earlier does not reflect the values of our airline. I have noted the incident in my report." Michael thanked her sincerely, and Ava looked up with thoughtful eyes. "She's really nice," Ava whispered. Michael agreed quietly, adding, "Most people are, Ava. What happened earlier is the exception, not the rule." Even amid the lingering darkness of cruelty, Ava's resilient spirit shone through when she brightened and asked, "Can we have ice cream when we get to Grandma's?" Michael laughed softly at her hopeful change in subject and said, "I think that can be arranged." For the next hour, the flight continued without further incident, the passengers slowly settling into the familiar rhythms of long-distance travel. Yet, as the plane entered Colorado airspace, the calm was shattered by another announcement from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have now landed safely in Denver. Our maintenance team will be checking the aircraft, which will take approximately 3 hours. In the meantime, you are welcome to deplane and wait in the terminal," Captain Rivera said in a measured tone. A collective groan of relief mixed with frustration arose from the passengers at the news of the delay, but it was clear that no one had faced a true crisis. As passengers began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave the plane, Michael turned to Ava with a gentle smile and said, "Looks like we have a few hours to kill here in Denver. How about we find some lunch in the terminal?" Ava, still a little shaken but buoyed by the thought of seeing her beloved grandmother soon, nodded enthusiastically. In that moment, Michael's heart ached not only from the sting of Diane Winters' hateful words, but also from the realization that such cruelty could leave lasting scars on a young soul. Every unsympathetic remark from Diane reminded him of the uphill battle against intolerance, and every sympathetic glance from fellow passengers only strengthened his resolve to keep fighting for justice. Stepping off the plane into the Denver terminal, Michael reflected on the fragile nature of our society, a society where kindness must be defended at every turn against cruelty and prejudice. He wished he could shield Ava from all the harsh realities of the world, yet he knew that learning to stand up against injustice was an essential lesson. Each moment of bigotry, no matter how fleeting, was a reminder of the work that still lay ahead. And as he walked slowly toward the exit with Ava by his side, Michael silently vowed that he would continue to speak out against every act of intolerance he encountered, ensuring that the dignity of people like his daughter would never be compromised again. In the busy terminal, passengers streamed out with their own stories and reflections of the flight. Michael felt a profound mix of anger, sorrow, and determination, knowing that the echoes of Diane Winters' cruelty would linger long after the flight had ended. Yet, amidst the harsh words and the lingering fear in Diane's eyes, there was also hope. Hope that the courage of a single father and the resilience of a young girl could inspire others to stand against prejudice. For Michael, every step he took was a quiet rebellion against the cruelty that had marred the journey, and every smile from Ava was a testament to the unyielding power of love and dignity. As Michael and Ava made their way through the terminal, the story of that flight continued to resonate in their hearts and in the hearts of all who had witnessed it. It was a story of courage, compassion, and the steadfast determination to rise above hate. Even though the encounter with Diane Winters had left a deep, painful mark on everyone involved, it also served as a powerful reminder that, in the face of cruelty, love and justice will always prevail. Ava brightened at the prospect as Michael Turner asked her, "Can we try to find green chili? Remember how Aunt Sophia always talks about Colorado green chili?" Michael smiled at his daughter's adventurous palate and assured her, "We can certainly try." As they made their way toward the front of the terminal at Denver International, they passed through the area where Diane Winters, still reeling from the unscheduled landing, sat rigidly in first class. When she spotted Michael and Ava, her eyes darted away quickly as if she wished to vanish into her seat, her earlier arrogance replaced by a palpable sense of humiliation. The terminal bustled with activity that day, with loud announcements and the constant flow of travelers creating a lively background. Michael and Ava soon found a restaurant that proudly boasted authentic Colorado cuisine, including the very green chili Ava was so eager to taste. As they settled into a cozy booth, Michael's observant eyes noted a familiar figure entering the restaurant. Dr. Emily Chen, who had also endured the turbulence of the flight, looked momentarily lost amidst the crowd. Michael raised a friendly hand in greeting, and Emily returned the gesture with a warm smile as she made her way over. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, and Michael, gesturing to the empty seat beside Ava, replied, "We would welcome the company. Dining alone in airports is always a bit depressing." Once seated, Emily carefully set her carry-on bag down and remarked with a light chuckle, "So, an unexpected Denver adventure, huh? At least the landing was smooth?" Michael nodded, replying, "Very smooth indeed. The captain seems to know exactly what he's doing." Ava, who had been mostly quiet since boarding, piped up with enthusiasm, "I'm trying the green chili. My Aunt Sophia says it's the best thing about Colorado." Emily smiled at the girl's lively energy and added, "I've heard that too. Mind if I join you on that culinary adventure?" As they placed their orders, Michael found himself studying Emily with a quiet respect. There was a calm confidence about her that he admired, the same quality he had seen in many of the female officers he had met in his long career. Over the course of the meal, their conversation flowed easily from Emily's recent surgical conference in Atlanta to Michael's public service with the FBI, and even to Ava's budding passion for marine biology. Emily explained that she had been presenting research on a new technique for repairing congenital heart defects in infants, describing it as less invasive with a faster recovery time. "It's exciting work," she said modestly, adding with a shrug, "though it probably sounds like a lot of medical jargon to most people." Ava's eyes sparkled as she earnestly remarked, "It sounds important. Saving babies' hearts is really amazing." With every shared smile and thoughtful nod, the table seemed to transform into a haven of genuine connection, far removed from the earlier discord on the plane. As they enjoyed their orders, each bite of the fiery, hearty green chili affirming Aunt Sophia's high praise, Michael's gaze wandered briefly across the restaurant. There, at a nearby table, sat James Wilson, the journalism professor who had been quietly scribbling notes ever since he boarded. Their eyes met for a moment, and James offered a respectful nod before returning to his work. Suddenly, Ava interrupted, pointing excitedly, "Dad, that lady from the plane is here." Michael followed her gaze to see Diane Winters, still looking shaken and out of place, making her way into the crowded restaurant. Her eyes were downcast as if she wished to avoid any further confrontation, and she chose a table at the far end, deliberately placing herself as far away from Michael and Ava as possible. The unexpected sight of Diane brought a momentary tension to their table. Emily's tone softened as she asked, "Is that her?" Michael nodded, instinctively shifting into a protective posture. "Yes. Before, she said I should give up my window seat and that you should be in the back of the plane," Michael explained quietly. Ava, with a mix of innocence and hurt in her voice, recalled, "She said I wasn't important enough to have the best seat." Emily's expression darkened with understanding and quiet indignation as she added, "I see. That kind of callous remark should never be tolerated." For a few seconds, the pleasant hum of conversation at the restaurant seemed to pause, as all eyes, even if only in their mind's eye, turned toward the painful memory of the flight. Before they could dwell too long on the unpleasant past, a distinguished older gentleman approached their booth. Richard Harrington, the retired federal judge they had met on the flight, stood before them with an air of solemn purpose. "Pardon the interruption," he said in his gentle Boston accent. "I'm Richard Harrington. I was seated next to Ms. Winters in first class and couldn't help overhearing what transpired." Michael, cautious yet respectful, introduced himself and Emily, while Ava, full of innocent curiosity, said, "I'm Ava." Richard's kind eyes softened as he turned to her, saying, "It is a pleasure to meet you, Ava. I wanted to apologize for what you experienced on our flight. It was utterly unacceptable." Michael quickly interjected, "You don't need to apologize, sir. You were not responsible." But Richard shook his head gently and replied, "In a way, I am. When we witness injustice and say nothing, we become complicit. I spent nearly 3 decades as a federal judge, and I can assure you that your composure today would have impressed any courtroom." Ava's cheeks warmed with the unexpected praise, and she murmured a shy, "Thank you, sir." Richard paused for a moment before continuing, "I have had an illuminating conversation with Ms. Winters earlier, and again just now. She asked me to convey her apologies for her behavior." Michael's skepticism was evident as he asked, "Did she really?" With a wry smile, Richard admitted, "What she actually said was that she may have overreacted and meant no offense, but I took the liberty of translating that into a proper apology." Emily couldn't help but let out a small laugh and remarked, "That's very generous translation work, Your Honor." Richard's eyes twinkled as he responded, "Years of judicial interpretation at work, Doctor. But the truth is, people like Diane rarely change overnight. Sometimes, however, a moment like this can plant a seed of self-reflection. Whether that seed grows into genuine change is something only time will tell." Michael considered his words thoughtfully, his mind reflecting on the many times his line of work had shown him both the worst and best of humanity. "That is a generous perspective, Judge Harrington," he said quietly, and Richard replied, "Call me Richard, please. It's not generosity, but pragmatism. We share this country with people whose views we abhor, and finding ways to coexist and maybe even influence change is essential." Just then, an announcement echoed through the terminal. "Attention passengers of Flight 2187 to San Francisco. Maintenance has been completed and boarding will resume in 30 minutes at Gate A42. Richard straightened and said, "Well, it seems our Denver sojourn is coming to an end." With a courteous nod, he added, "It was a pleasure meeting you all. Perhaps we'll continue our conversation during the rest of our journey." As Richard departed, Michael found himself reflecting on the unexpected bonds that had formed amid the chaos. He thought about Emily Chen's quiet compassion, Richard Harrington's judicial wisdom, and even James Wilson's diligent note-taking, all woven together by the thread of an incident that had started with cruelty, but was now giving way to understanding and healing. At Gate A42, the waiting passengers had gathered in small clusters, sharing murmurs and reflections on the tumultuous flight. Michael spotted Richard Harrington engaged in a serious discussion with James Wilson, their conversation punctuated by the scribbles of notes and thoughtful glances. In contrast, Diane Winters sat alone, her body language defensive as she shielded herself behind designer luggage and kept her gaze locked on her phone. The arrival of Captain Rivera and his first officer from the jet bridge drew the attention of everyone waiting. The captain approached the gate agent with a microphone and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during our unscheduled stop. Our maintenance team has resolved the hydraulic issue and we are cleared to continue our journey to San Francisco. We should arrive approximately 3 hours behind our original schedule. Boarding will commence shortly, and I promise a smooth remainder of our flight." A collective murmur of relief mixed with residual frustration filled the air, as safety, above all, had taken precedence over convenience. As boarding began, Michael couldn't help but notice Richard Harrington concluding his conversation with James Wilson before deliberately approaching Diane Winters. Her initial defensive posture softened as Richard spoke with calm determination. Michael and Emily exchanged glances, silently wondering what could possibly emerge from this unexpected encounter. Diane's face, which had been etched with humiliation and anger, now seemed to shift to something more complex, a blend of reluctance and resignation. In that moment, it was as if the unsparing cruelty of her earlier actions was being met with a quiet force of accountability, leaving her to confront the consequences of her behavior. Looking up in disbelief, Michael saw Diane Winters, that same woman whose earlier cruelty had caused so much distress, now making her way down the aisle, accompanied by Richard Harrington. As they approached row 14, Diane halted abruptly, her face a conflicted mix of discomfort and determination, while Richard stood a few steps behind, his presence offering both moral support and a subtle, insistent pressure. In a voice that wavered with reluctance yet still carried a note of formality, Diane addressed Michael, though her eyes wandered as if seeking escape from the confrontation. "Excuse me, Michael," she stammered. I wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier. It was inappropriate." Each word seemed to come at great personal cost, as though she were forced to dig deep into a part of herself she had long tried to hide. Michael could sense that Richard's steady influence had helped her find the courage to speak these words, even if they felt forced and uncertain. Before Michael could offer any response, Ava, with the unassuming grace of a child who has experienced more than her share of unkindness, spoke up softly, "Thank you for saying sorry." Her natural graciousness lightened the charged atmosphere for everyone present. For a brief moment, Diane's eyes met Ava's, and something shifted in her expression, a glimmer of genuine regret breaking through the hardened mask of entitlement. "You're welcome," Diane managed, the words sounding almost foreign, as if they were being spoken for the first time. Richard cleared his throat gently before adding, "Ms. Winters has also agreed to make a donation to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis as a gesture of educational commitment." His tone left no room for misunderstanding that this had been part of a careful negotiation meant to underscore accountability. Diane nodded stiffly, accepting this public announcement of penance without protest. Michael, understanding the significance of this reluctant admission, replied formally, "I appreciate that," though he knew it was only a small step toward addressing a deep-seated cruelty. The remainder of the flight passed without incident, the plane climbing steadily through clear skies on its way to San Francisco. As they crossed the majestic Rockies, the breathtaking landscape below drew gasps of appreciation from Ava, who pressed her face against the window to absorb every detail of the snow-capped peaks and expansive forests. Conversation flowed easily among the three of them as they discussed everything from Emily's challenging medical cases to Michael's less classified experiences with the FBI and Ava's bright academic interests. There was an ease to their interaction that felt almost remarkable, given they had only met a few hours earlier. During a lull in their conversation, Emily mentioned, "You know, I host a monthly dinner for my colleagues at UCSF. It's very informal, just good food and better conversation. If you two have time during your stay in San Francisco, you're more than welcome to join us this Sunday." Michael raised an eyebrow in pleasant surprise, replying, "That's very kind. We'd enjoy that, wouldn't we, Ava?" Ava nodded enthusiastically and added, "Will there be other doctors there? I have some questions about marine mammal medicine for my school project." Emily laughed warmly and said, "I can definitely invite my friend Dr. Patel. She works with the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito and would love to talk your ear off about sea lion rehabilitation." As they exchanged contact information, Michael felt a stirring of unexpected possibility. What had begun as a routine trip to visit his mother had transformed into something much richer. Unexpected connections forged from the crucible of conflict that might never have emerged otherwise. When they finally began their descent into San Francisco, the golden late afternoon light bathed the city in a warm glow, and the iconic Golden Gate Bridge became visible in the distance. Ava, who had visited her grandmother annually since she was a toddler, continued to press her face to the window in undiminished wonder, exclaiming, "There's Grandma's neighborhood," as she pointed toward the Sunset District, where Eleanor Taylor had lived for 4 decades in the same Victorian house where Michael had grown up. As the plane touched down at SFO, the passengers erupted in spontaneous applause, a common response after any flight filled with unexpected challenges. Captain Rivera's voice soon came over the intercom, thanking everyone for their patience and cooperation during the unscheduled stop in Denver. While the plane taxied to the gate, Michael noticed James Wilson several rows ahead, still diligently writing in his notebook. The journalist had observed everything: the initial confrontation, the unscheduled landing, even Diane's reluctant apology, all with the keen eye of someone always searching for the story beneath the surface. When they finally deplaned, Michael was surprised to find both Richard Harrington and James Wilson waiting in the terminal, deep in conversation. They paused when they spotted Michael, Ava, and Emily emerging from the jet bridge. "Agent Turner," James called, approaching with purpose. "I'm James Wilson from the Berkeley School of Journalism. I was wondering if I might have a word with you." Michael tensed slightly, his professional caution coming to the fore as he regarded the man carefully. James continued, "I want to know what happened on our flight today. Not as a news story, because I'm not that kind of journalist anymore, but as part of a longer piece I'm working on about everyday acts of courage and their ripple effects." Richard joined in, his judicial presence lending gravity to the moment, explaining, "Mr. Wilson shared his concept with me, and I find it quite compelling. I've agreed to contribute my perspective." Michael hesitated for a moment, looking down at Ava, who watched the exchange with interest. "We're here to visit family, not become case studies," Michael said, to which James nodded understandingly. "Of course, and you can decline entirely if you wish." But he pressed on. "What happened today? The confrontation, how you handled it? Even Miss Winters' eventual apology? It's a microcosm of larger social dynamics." As they exchanged contact information, Michael realized that their turbulent flight, with all its unexpected mechanical and social challenges, had connected them to a broader community than they had ever imagined. There was Emily with her medical brilliance and genuine warmth, Richard with his judicial wisdom and moral clarity, and James with his storyteller's instinct for meaningful narratives. Even Diane Winters, whose prejudice had sparked the chain of events, had perhaps embarked on a reluctant journey toward change. Soon, as they prepared to head to baggage claim, Michael asked Ava, "Are you ready to see Grandma?" with a hopeful smile. "So ready," Ava replied with a grin. "I can smell that peach cobbler already." As they said their goodbyes to their new acquaintances, promising to reconnect during their stay in San Francisco, Michael reflected on how differently this trip had unfolded from what he had expected. What should have been a routine flight had instead become a crucible that tested character, exposed raw prejudice, yet also forged unexpected bonds and perhaps even catalyzed change. Walking through the bustling terminal, Michael and Ava strolled side by side, their matching rolling suitcases trailing behind them as they navigated the throng of travelers, each on their own unique journey. Michael couldn't help but think that some connections formed in moments of crisis could endure well beyond the temporary community of Flight 2187. In the arrivals area, Eleanor Taylor was waiting for them, her silver hair unmistakable among the crowd. At 75, she stood as straight as she had during her days arguing cases before the Supreme Court, her keen eyes sparkling with joy as she spotted her son and granddaughter. "There they are," she called, opening her arms wide as Ava ran to embrace her. "Grandma, we had the craziest flight." Ava launched into an animated account of their journey, and Michael watched as Eleanor's expression shifted from warm welcome to concern to proud admiration as she learned how her granddaughter had faced prejudice with dignity and resilience. "Just like your mother would have," Eleanor said tenderly, squeezing Ava's hand. In that moment, the mention of Sophia Taylor brought a pang of grief to Michael's heart, a sorrow that had softened over the 3 years since her passing, yet would never entirely disappear. Still, there was comfort in seeing how much of Sophia lived on in Ava, her strength, compassion, and unflagging optimism. Eleanor added with a knowing smile, teasingly, "And you, Michael, always flashing your FBI credentials like some television drama." Michael laughed, fully aware of his mother's playful approval beneath the gentle teasing. Michael Turner's flight from Atlanta to San Francisco turned out to be far more than a simple journey. From the moment he and his gentle 12-year-old daughter, Ava, stepped onto Flight 2187, the air was thick with expectation and a promise of family reunion. Michael, a dedicated FBI special agent with over 2 decades of service under his belt, had already faced many challenges in his line of work, but nothing could have prepared him for the clash of values that was about to unfold at 30,000 feet. Ava, whose quiet intelligence and warm smile had always been her greatest strength, clutched a well-worn novel and looked forward to the annual visit to her grandmother, a visit that promised her a taste of that legendary peach cobbler and a reminder of family traditions stretching back generations. As the plane taxied onto the runway and the cabin filled with a mix of excited chatter and subdued anticipation, a storm was brewing in the back of the plane. Diane Winters, a 58-year-old woman who carried herself with a haughty air and believed herself to be part of Atlanta's aristocracy by virtue of her late husband's real estate fortune, was already in a foul mood. With acrylic nails tapping impatiently on her phone, she complained loudly about having to wait in line like an ordinary person. Her demands for a window seat in first class were not just a matter of personal comfort, but an assertion of her entitlement. A sentiment that Michael had encountered too many times in his career. When Diane finally boarded, her face flushed with indignation, she launched into a tirade at a kindly flight attendant who tried to explain that her boarding pass clearly stated an aisle seat in a fully booked first class. It wasn't long before her tone turned even more venomous as she made her way through the cabin, her eyes scanning for an opportunity to impose her will. And then, in a moment that would soon mark the turning point of the flight, she fixed her gaze on Ava sitting by the window. With a cold, calculated determination, Diane demanded to switch seats with Ava, citing a supposed medical condition that required her to have a window seat. Michael's protective instincts immediately flared. He calmly explained that Ava had a history of motion sickness, a minor detail that did not justify compromising a child's comfort for the sake of an entitled passenger's convenience. Once the initial storm had passed, the flight continued with a fragile calm. Michael tried to shield Ava from the lingering sting of the encounter, but the memory of Diane's biting remarks lingered in Ava's wide, troubled eyes. Later, as the plane climbed steadily through the clear skies, Michael and Ava found solace in each other's company. Ava's gentle nature shone through as she listened to Michael explain, with both honesty and tenderness, that some people allow their own insecurities and prejudices to dictate their actions, and that their cruelty said nothing about the worth of others but everything about their own inner turmoil. Even as Michael tried to reassure her that the world was full of kindness and resilience, the scars of that earlier encounter had etched themselves deeply into both of their hearts. Meanwhile, the aftermath of the confrontation began to ripple through the cabin. Word of the exchange spread quietly, passed from one passenger to another in hushed tones of shock and sympathy. Among those affected was Dr. Emily Chen, a 36-year-old pediatric cardiac surgeon returning from a surgical conference in Atlanta. As a Chinese-American woman who had long battled the double-edged sword of professional challenges and subtle racial bias in a male-dominated field, Emily felt a surge of vindication when Michael had stood up to Diane. Her own experiences of discrimination made her deeply empathetic toward Ava's plight, and as soon as the seatbelt sign was switched off, she resolved to approach Michael and Ava with a kind offer of friendship. Emily found Michael and Ava at a restaurant in the bustling Denver terminal, a welcome refuge from the tension of the flight. The restaurant, known for its authentic Colorado cuisine, proudly featured a signature green chili that Ava, with her adventurous palate, was eager to try. As Michael and Ava settled into a cozy booth, Emily joined them, explaining that dining alone in an airport was far too lonely. Her warm presence and gentle humor offered a welcome distraction, and soon their conversation flowed effortlessly from tales of challenging surgical cases to lighter anecdotes about marine biology, a topic Ava adored. The simple act of sharing a meal together, with the savory heat of the green chili igniting their senses, was a balm to the bruised spirits left by the earlier ordeal. Yet even in this moment of tentative camaraderie, the specter of Diane Winters loomed large. At the far end of the restaurant, Diane was still a figure of discomfort and humiliation. Having been forced into a reluctant retreat by Michael's firm stance, Diane now sat alone, her posture defensive, and her eyes fixed on her phone as if trying to erase the memory of the confrontation. The bitter taste of public shame lingered, and even as the ambient warmth of the restaurant tried to soothe her, Diane's inner turmoil was palpable. Her earlier cruelty had not only exposed the worst in her character, but had also ignited a conflict that continued to haunt every interaction. It was a stark reminder that while Michael and his companions were striving for connection and understanding, there were those who clung to old prejudices with a stubborn and destructive ferocity. As the flight resumed and the trio, Michael, Ava, and Emily, settled back into their seats, the day's events began to take on a broader meaning. Michael couldn't help but reflect on how the confrontation, as ugly and hurtful as it had been, had also set in motion unexpected ripples of change. The next part of the journey saw further human connections blossoming in the wake of adversity. 2 rows behind them, Richard Harrington, a distinguished retired federal judge with a calm yet piercing demeanor, made his presence known. His measured words and gentle corrections had a way of cutting through arrogance, and it wasn't long before he found himself engaging Diane in conversation. With a quiet but insistent tone, Richard explained that when injustice was witnessed and left unchallenged, it rendered all of us complicit. His words, laced with both legal authority and moral gravity, struck a chord even with someone as entrenched in her own prejudices as Diane. After a few strained moments, Diane, seemingly forced by Richard's unwavering resolve, offered a tentative apology. It was not a wholehearted transformation, but even a reluctant apology carried the faint promise of self-reflection. Ava, with a natural innocence and a grace beyond her years, simply said, "Thank you for saying sorry," a small act of forgiveness that softened the harsh edges of the encounter. Richard further disclosed that, as part of the negotiation, Diane had agreed to donate to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, an act meant to serve as a gesture of accountability and educational commitment. Though Diane's nod was stiff and her tone flat, Michael recognized that this moment, painful as it was, might plant a seed of change in someone who had been so stubbornly cruel. As Diane returned to first class, her step lighter than before, Richard quietly remarked that she would be thinking about this day for a long time. A remark that lingered in Michael's mind as both a victory and a reminder of the work still to be done. Shortly after, the trio's attention shifted as the plane began its descent into San Francisco. The magnificent panorama outside the window, a tapestry of snow-capped Rockies and vast, whispering forests, elicited gasps of wonder from Ava. Despite the lingering bitterness of the earlier confrontation, Ava's face lit up with the pure joy of witnessing nature's splendor. Michael, ever the stoic protector, felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as he observed his daughter's resilience. Her eyes, wide with wonder, seemed to hold the promise of a brighter future, even as the scars of prejudice reminded him of the harsh realities of the world. When the plane finally touched down at San Francisco International Airport, the passengers erupted in spontaneous applause, a customary expression of relief after a flight filled with unexpected challenges. Michael, Ava, and Emily disembarked together, their bond strengthened by the shared ordeal. Outside, waiting in the bustling arrivals area, stood Eleanor Taylor, Michael's mother, a stately 75-year-old woman with silver hair and a presence as formidable as her past arguing cases before the Supreme Court. Her eyes sparkled with pride as she embraced her son and granddaughter. "There they are," she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around them with the fierce, unconditional love of family. Ava's face broke into a radiant smile as she recounted the day's events, describing the terrifying confrontation, the sting of Diane Winters' harsh words, and even the unexpected moments of reconciliation. Eleanor listened with a mixture of concern and admiration, her heart swelling with both sorrow for the pain inflicted upon her family and pride at the resilience they had shown. Later that evening, as Eleanor drove them toward her charming Victorian home in the Sunset District, a neighborhood steeped in history and bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, Michael and Ava settled into a reflective conversation. Eleanor's teasing about Michael's FBI credentials, delivered with a twinkle in her eye reminiscent of a television drama, brought a brief but welcome burst of laughter. "Now, let's get you two home," she said. "That cobbler isn't going to eat itself." As they walked toward Eleanor's car, with Ava skipping ahead in boundless youthful energy, Michael recounted the unexpected invitations they had received that day. Emily's dinner invitation, James Wilson's request for an interview, and even the subtle promise that something in Diane Winters might begin to change. Eleanor, with her characteristic dry wit, remarked, "Sounds like you made quite an impression, though I'm not surprised. Turners have been making impressions since before either of us was born." Michael smiled as he thought of his family's proud legacy, a lineage that included a great-grandfather among the first black lawyers in Georgia, and a mother whose groundbreaking career had paved the way for future generations. He felt a deep responsibility to pass on those values of justice, courage, and compassion to Ava, who was already beginning to carve her own path in the world. As they drove through the streets of San Francisco, the golden evening light painting the city in warm hues, Michael found himself reflecting on the day's events with a mixture of relief and solemnity. What had begun as an ugly display of prejudice had transformed into an unexpected journey of connection and potential redemption. The flight, with all its turbulence, both mechanical and emotional, had become a crucible where the raw forces of human behavior were laid bare. In that confined space, Michael had confronted not only the cruelty of Diane Winters, but also the harsh reality that, sometimes, even the most deeply ingrained prejudices could be challenged by acts of courage and the gentle power of accountability. Ava, meanwhile, rolled down the window of their car to feel the cool San Francisco air on her face. Her expression was one of pure joy as she spotted the distant shimmer of the Pacific Ocean, a reminder that life, with all its challenges, was also filled with beauty and promise. Michael looked at his daughter and saw not just the child he had protected throughout the flight, but the bright, resilient young person who would carry forward a legacy of justice and compassion. Some journeys change you in ways you never expect, he thought, his heart swelling with both pride and a quiet sorrow for the injustices that still existed in the world. By the time they reached Eleanor's driveway, the rhythmic hum of the city faded into a gentle backdrop to the intimate family reunion. Eleanor, standing as straight as ever with her silver hair glistening in the fading light, greeted them with a joyful cry. "There they are!" she called, and Ava, bursting with excitement, ran to embrace her grandmother. "Grandma, we had the craziest flight!" Ava exclaimed, launching into an animated account of every twist and turn, from the heart-wrenching confrontation with Diane Winters to the unexpected moments of reconciliation and the warm new friendships that had emerged amid the chaos. Eleanor listened intently, her eyes reflecting a kaleidoscope of emotions: pride, concern, and an enduring hope that the future would be kinder. "Just like your mother would have," she said softly when Ava finished her story, squeezing her granddaughter's hand with both affection and quiet resolve. In that tender moment, the mention of Sophia Taylor stirred a pang of grief in Michael's heart, a grief that had softened over the 3 years since her passing but never truly faded. Yet even amidst the sorrow, there was comfort in seeing how much of Sophia's indomitable spirit lived on in Ava, her strength, her compassion, her unwavering optimism in the face of life's challenges. As they stepped inside the warm, welcoming home, Eleanor's teasing about Michael's FBI credentials, a playful reminder of his duty and the weight of responsibility he carried, elicited a light-hearted laugh from Michael. "You always did know how to make light of even the darkest moments," he said, his tone both affectionate and resigned. In the quiet of that family reunion, with the scent of fresh peach cobbler wafting from the kitchen and the soft glow of evening settling over them, Michael reflected on the extraordinary day they had endured. Flight 2187 had been more than just a means of transportation from Atlanta to San Francisco. It had been a journey through the turbulent landscape of human prejudice and the promise of transformation. A journey that had revealed both the cruelty that can reside in some hearts and the resilient hope that emerges when individuals dare to stand against it. The echoes of the day's events lingered in Michael's mind as he watched Ava's bright eyes take in every detail of her grandmother's home, and he silently vowed that he would continue to fight for justice and dignity in every sphere of his life. He knew that the scars left by cruelty might never completely vanish, but he also believed that every act of kindness, every moment of accountability, and every connection forged in the crucible of conflict held the potential to spark real, lasting change. In the days that followed, Michael, Ava, and their newfound friends would come to realize that even the harshest encounters could lead to unexpected growth. The invitations from Dr. Emily Chen, the thoughtful words from Judge Richard Harrington, and even the cautious inquiries from journalist James Wilson promised to weave their experience into a broader tapestry of courage and resilience. A tapestry that, despite its painful beginnings, would shine with the light of hope and the possibility of redemption. As Michael sat down later that evening with a cup of steaming coffee, he thought back on the day with a mixture of relief and determination. He knew that the battle against prejudice was far from over, and that figures like Diane Winters still clung to outdated views that hurt others. Yet he also recognized that every confrontation, every public call for accountability, and every reluctant apology chipped away at the walls of hatred, even if only slightly at first. And sometimes, as Judge Harrington had said, change began with a single hesitant apology that planted a seed in the heart of someone who had long believed themselves untouchable. Ava, now asleep with a contented smile on her face, lay nearby as Michael gazed out the window at the twinkling lights of San Francisco. In that quiet moment, he felt both the weight of his responsibilities and the warm glow of hope that came from knowing that tomorrow was a new day, a day on which people could continue to learn, grow, and perhaps, in small but meaningful ways, become kinder to one another. Michael Turner knew that the journey was far from over, but as he reflected on the events of Flight 2187 and the unexpected connections forged amidst conflict and reconciliation, he felt a renewed commitment to his work and a deep, abiding love for the people who had shown him that even in the face of cruelty, the human spirit could triumph. In the end, the flight was not just a passage through the skies, but a microcosm of life itself, a place where prejudices could be challenged, where hurt could be met with empathy, and where even the most bitter conflicts might eventually give way to understanding and hope. And as Michael drifted off to sleep that night, he carried with him the promise that every small act of courage, every gesture of compassion would help pave the way for a better, more just world. A world in which the light of love and dignity would always shine through, no matter how dark the storm.